welcome to All Right in Sin City, a podcast about writers and writing in the Windsor-Detroit region. Your podcasters today are
Irene Moore Davis, author, educator, and local historian.
Kim Conklin, Windsor-based writer and filmmaker.
And me, Sarah Jarvis, former bookseller, publishing rep, and literary festival chair.
Petra Kuppers is a disability culture activist and a community performance artist who uses somatics, performance, and speculative writing to engage audiences toward more socially just and enjoyable futures. She is the Anita Gonzalez Collegiate Professor of Performance Studies and Disability Culture at the University of Michigan, a 2023 Guggenheim Fellow, and co-director of the community art space and somatic writing studio Turtle Disco. She is the author of the poetry collection Pearl Stitch, the Queer Crypt speculative story collection Ice Bar, and numerous academic books. Her poetry collection Gut Botany was named one of the top 10 U.S. poetry books of 2020 by the New York Public Library, and it won the 2022 Creative Book Award by the Association for the Study of Literature and the Environment. Her latest collection, Diver Beneath the Street, True Crime Meets Eco-Poetry at the Level of the Soil, was published by Wayne State University Press in 2024. Welcome to the podcast, Petra.
Thank you so much. It's really beautiful to be here. Thanks so much for inviting me. I'm glad to be here.
When and how did you first fall in love with writing?
Oh, yes. Well, I am German. You will hear that from my accent. I'm a German person living in Michigan. And I fell in love when I was quite a little child. I was reading voraciously. I loved reading. And pretty soon I got involved with the kind of fairy worlds, the kind of, the saga worlds, the creatures that lived in the rivers around me. And I began to write about them. I quite early on began to think about what lives around me and what kind of different animations there are around me. And the other thing I did as a child was to write crime stories. I was trying to be like Agatha Christie or something. So I remember writing these stories, and on like A5 was the dimension of the paper, and I had all these A5 sheets with handwriting, beautiful cursive child handwriting, and I would stitch them together with red thread and make little bows in them, and they would often revolve around the smell of almonds, like cyanide, those kinds of stories. That's what I wrote when I was in middle school.
So all of that together has come together now to form this wonderful collection. Isn't that interesting? You were always meant to do this.
Yes, I think that's absolutely right. That's exactly how I feel about it. Every single one of the collections have their own grounding in where I come from, where I live, how I live. And this one really does go back to these early crime stories.
Well, in your preface, you say that this book began in 2011 when you picked up a tattered paperback, The Michigan Murders, in the Ann Arbor Public Library and began reading it en route to the Detroit airport. Did these stories start to find their way into your writing immediately? And when did you know that this was going to be a full poetry collection?
That's a great question. And yeah, I got to think about when that exactly happened. So yes, I remember this very vividly when I was thinking so much about how to traverse space. I'm a wheelchair user. I use a scooter and I use a wheelchair. So as someone like that, I always have to think about how I get from A to B. So this is why in my introduction it says that I'm literally on my way to the airport, because figuring out how to get myself with a wheelchair to the airport is important for me to do. I can't just do what everybody does. I have to always think through all the steps. So and there I found this book, and it was fascinating. And then I met many people who had read the book. I met many people who knew the stories of the Michigan murders. I met people who knew some of these women. So I just, as time went on, and I was beginning to become more and more of an inhabitant of Michigan, of Ypsilanti and of Ann Arbor, I became more attuned to to the traces of these stories on the land. So much of these stories seem to me about how women traverse space. That's the connection to my wheelchair story. How women are hindered from traversing space, how women are judged for moving through space, hitchhiking or using a ride that they find on the notice board of the student union. People get judged for women get judged for traveling this way, not people, but women and non-binary others get judged for how they traverse space. So that was the beginning hinge. That was when I got really interested. And then my wife and I bought a home in Ypsilanti, and it turned out that we lived on the same street as the murder house where we were living in the same street. Just a few houses down was the house where they found the final clues that convicted the killer. And I think it was at that point that I began really writing about this. And most of the writing happened during the lockdown, the COVID lockdown, because we were all thrown back into our neighborhoods, right? We were all just hanging at home. There was a lot of writing, a lot of thinking about the spaces we were in. My book is full of spiders that were keeping us company in the house. And I just, with my little scooter, I just went on these walks in the neighborhood, which I hadn't really done so much before. I was driving around like most Michiganders do, but I was walking in the neighborhood. So I was coming by this house all the time. I became very aware of what kind of plants are in all the gardens around me. And I began researching what the history of this land was, like how this land, College Heights, the College Heights neighborhood in Ypsilanti, how it looked in 1967 and 1969 when the Michigan murders happened. What was there? What was there before it became the kind of neighborhood it is now? So this changing land use became also part of the story of the collection.
What a serendipity story. You almost had to write this book. So in comparison to your previous work, what was it about the process of creating this collection that was different for you? How did it change from other works?
Yeah, thank you. First, I probably need to say what's similar, and what's similar is this attention to the natural world. So that's probably the line that runs through all my work. It's eco-poetry. I'm very interested in what it means to be surrounded by both natural, suburban, and urban forms. I am very interested to be in touch with plants. What was different in this collection was that I was interested in going deeper down. I was diving in. I'm the diver beneath the street, so I'm diving into the soil. I got really fascinated with, well, how do I tell the story of violence? Both the violence of the Michigan murders, 67 to 69, and also the serial killer that was active in 2019 in Detroit. I didn't want to tell violent stories. I did not want to tell voyeuristic stories. I do not want to glorify the killer or glorify violence. All the usual critiques that we have of true crime stories. I definitely didn't want to do that. And then how else do I witness that things happened here, that violence is part of this land, violence of all kinds, violence against Indigenous people, racialized violence, gendered violence, so many different violences. So, and what I decided to do is to look at moments of decay. So I'm with bodies as they're decaying. I'm with the soil as a transformer. I'm with nematodes and springtails and little worms and beetles as they're transforming organic matter, as they're moving the soil. So that is an important part of the book that I had not had as a focus in the other books, this diving into both water, the Huron River, soil, looking at transformation, looking at decay in this way.
I was telling the co-host before you joined that it really takes genuine skill to write about the biological processes involved in the decomposition of murder victims while honoring the dead and describing all of that with such tenderness. How heavy was the burden of writing these poems, and what kind of self-care practices helped you to get through this process?
Thank you so much. Thank you, Irene. That I'm so glad that you see that. That's for me the most important thing. That's the one thing I hope people will take away from this: tenderness and care and being with, so rather than voyeurism or the glorification of violence. So I'm just I'm happy and touched that about this question. And of course, another part of the story is my own closeness to death. So this notion of decay and the murder story is only one part of the diver. The other part is my own. I came down with what was most likely COVID in March 2020, at a time when none of us had the means to test, right? Really, right? When only very few people got tested. But I had this terrible disease, and I started making my will. It was like a very terrible experience. And I also process other kind of near-death experiences that I had in my life in the book. So there's a car accident. There's lots of experiences of pain and of being in hospitals in this book. So that edge of life and death is a really important story in the book in multiple ways, not just in other people's life and death, but also in my own. That I have my own stake in this. There is my own blood in this as well. And the self-care practices are really these movements in space. There really are these being with the plants and the land, and being aware of the histories of the land, being aware of what flows, being aware of the composition of soil, being aware of the river running through, of the continuities of habitation, of indigenous life, of settler life, becoming aware of that richness of how life works at the human level, at the more than human level, at the level of soil and elements. Those were the self-care practices that I engaged in, both in the house, hanging out with my little spider here, really looking at what are the kind of, what's the lung system of a spider, researching that and kind of hanging out with a spider friend here, and also hanging out with the white pine that's in my yard, so, and I do talk about not a self-care practice, but a care practice by a friend. So I have an herbalist friend called Beth Currens, who made tinctures for me from the white pine that's in the yard of the house that my wife and I share. So she took the boughs of the white pine that had come down in storms and made this beautiful tincture out of it, which is really helpful for respiratory stuff. So I was drinking that while I was writing this as well. So there's these lovely community care practices that are part of this.
Wow. And as we've talked about, there's such a strong sense of place in the book, not least the streets that you live on. So what impact has living in Michigan had on your writing and on this collection in particular? And would you mind sharing how long you've lived in Michigan since you came from Germany?
Yeah. So I came from Germany on a circuitous route. It wasn't straightforward. I lived for 10 years in Wales, in the UK. I lived in Aotearoa, New Zealand for a while, and in Australia. And I lived on the East Coast for a bit as well. And in Texas. I did live in Texas for a little bit. So I came to the University of Michigan in, I believe it was 2009. So quite a while now, right? So quite a bit. But for a while, I was one of these people in an academic relationship where I was in one place teaching at the University of Michigan, and my partner at the time was in California. So I was like, whoa, like going backwards and forwards in a way that's very unsustainable, not good for the planet, but it was fun. And then eventually I did meet my wonderful wife, poet and dancer Stephanie Height. And we got together. She's a Michigander. She's born and raised here. So that was extremely grounding and wonderful for me. I really began to get a sense of more of a sense of what it meant to be here. So we're both water babies. We swim in the lakes. We swim in the river. We really, she allowed me to really put down roots here. So that is a very significant part of being here. I had the pleasure at the time when I came, the University of Michigan offered multiple courses in Anishinaabe, the Ojibwe language, and I was able to take some courses in the language. I don't speak the language. It's just taking 2 courses is not enough for me to speak the language, but it allowed me to get a sense of the grammar of the language and the grammar, and that is in some ways a grammar of the land. So I was very interested in writing in ways that would bring the vibrancy and the aliveness of land and land relations and ethical land relations to this writing. So that is another Michigan story that's processed here. And yeah, and then I just really love living in Ypsilanti, which is it's a diverse place. There's lots of different people living there. There's lots going on. And it's a very queer place, which is also central to the diver. So I do talk in the book a little bit about Turtle Disco, which is the movement and writing studio that Stephanie and I co-lead in Ypsilanti, and which started 7 years ago now, actually. And initially, it was a place where local disabled and queer folk, or people who identified around somehow along those lines, could come, and we would be engaged in movement, meditations together, in writing together, dance work together. And then, of course, the pandemic hit and we went online. So right now, Turtle Disco is a fairly international place. People come from all over to our weekly offerings. But we're beginning slowly to get back into creating that neighborhood feel where people can come with their bicycles, or they can walk to us, and that is just that's beautiful that we have communities like that in Michigan, where you can still do that, where you can create this community feeling.
That is wonderful. And we do remember having Stephanie here on the podcast with her book, Psych Murders, which was another exercise in a challenging topic done extremely well. So what impact has your practice as a community performance artist had on your writing and on these poems? How has that intersected?
Yeah. Yes, that's also a lovely question. So not so much in this book. A lot of my writing is intersected and is montaged, not in this poetry book, not in Diver Beneath the Street, but in my academic work, my other work, my academic work, my activist work. I publish a lot of material that is co-created with multiple people, where I'm hosting many different voices, often voices of fellow disabled people. And that's a very significant part of my presence in the writing world, slightly separate from the poetry world. The poetry is really where I'm exploring a sort of my voice, but my voice in connection with these multiple voices of creatures and of experiences. So there are many traces of community work in here, and they are mainly through the witnessing of practices that we're engaging in on the land. So many of the poems, as I'm sure you noted, says while drifting during a particular performance. Many of the performance of the poems have that as an epigraph, and it tells you that I was with other people, dancing with other people, being in skin touch with others, as an inspiration for the writing. The writing becomes a performance remnant, becomes a performance witness. And I think that's a really beautiful and particular aesthetic to my own work. This is what makes me very happy. These pieces are memory pieces of moments of a particular walk that I took, or a engagement that I had with a group of people, or with one person, the kind of intimacy of being in performance practice together.
So how much impact did your editor have on the final structure of the book, the way the poems are divided, and how much of that reflects the way that you originally envisioned this collection appearing?
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I didn't really. I love my publisher. My publisher is just absolutely fabulous. I love working with Wayne State University Press, but we didn't really have a kind of editorial relationship like that. I think like many poetry books, people take them. There might be a comment here or there, but there wasn't like a lot of back and forth around that. I think what the main aspect of the book that this wonderful editorial team at Wayne State University Press, what they're bringing to it is this incredible visual richness that they bring, that they're allowing to happen in the book. So I give them the text, and then they ask me, Petra, well, how would you like this to look? And I gave them one image of a skeletonized leaf, and it was just like any image. It could be. Then I said, this is just open. The designer can work with however they want to. These are the sort of ideas I have. And then every time I do this with them, they're creating this beautiful object, and they're using colored interleaves. So I'm showing here right now an orange interleave. So there's this beautiful orange, very richly colored material that's at the front and at the back of the book. You have this lovely design where you see a skeleton of a leaf, and then you see the announcements of, poems by my name. They are like in little red markers, which look like crime markers. They're just, so there's just incredible attention to design that very few books get. I'm showing right now a page throughout it. So there's a section heading. This is just section 5. They're just like numbered sections. But each of these sections are, again, on this skeletonized leaf. It's gorgeous. It's so beautiful. There's this grayscale leaf that comes through again and again. And there's another leaf that's coming through that goes down into the earth, where you have the tip of the leaf folding in on itself and kind of diving down. And it's like a trace, like a faint trace on the paper, right next to and just as powerful as the writing that is on the other side. So I love this integration of visual work and written work, and that is for me such a feature of the editorial work of Wayne State University Press. I just think it's just stunning, and very few presses do that. So I'm very grateful to them.
Well, thank you for describing those pages for us, because it is a little bit hard to describe what something looks like on a podcast. But the shape of certain poems as well, such as tunnels or earth sails, is really fascinating. And is that also the way you envisioned formatting these poems, or did the editorial staff, design staff do that? How did that come about?
Yeah, no, this is something I envisaged as well. So as I said, the text, they've been very respectful to the text. There's been, we had conversations, but the conversations have been more about the overall shape of the book, not the individual pages. So tunnels, for instance, if I'm describing that, this is one of these pieces that emerged out of community performance practice. So it emerged out of turtle disco practice. We were engaging in a practice that I call amoeba dancing. And it's like an amoeba. And it's a sound practice where we're dropping sounds into our bodies. And the sound is like an O. I'm just making the sound now, like O. Now imagine that O, instead of going out, going into my body and creating like a hollow in my body. Moving through the tissues and structures of my body. So there's also other sounds like zzz, like really that begins to really play with the bones inside one's body. So in this practice, which we always do with a bunch of people, is like a form of meditation. You send these sounds through you and see what images come up. So in this tunnels poem, I have 3 different sections that each look at different kinds of whole and tunnel imagery that come up. One is a disability culture ancestor, Martin Ramirez. Martin Ramirez was an outsider artist. He was called into the lineage of outsider artists. Really, in the main, he was an incarcerated man in an asylum in California. He was Mexican. It's unclear whether he had the English language, so he was seen as catatonic, but it might very well be that he also just didn't have the language skills to communicate with psychiatrists. So it's a complicated story of incarceration and disability together, right? So like many of the stories of disability that I find interesting. So he painted images of tunnels. That's what he did. He actually went around this asylum and he took all the paper he could find. So there's these famous materials of his where he took the linings of drawers, like when you open up a drawer and there's this paper lining, he took out the drawings, the linings of these drawings and painted on them. Before people found out that he was quite an amazing artist, and eventually a psychiatrist gave him paper to write on. Until then, he used these found materials to create these tunnel images, like railway tunnels, like very interesting shapes. So one part of the poem speaks about that shape. Another part of the poem is an underwater cave. Another one is these dinosaur bones, moving through the bones. Then there's that goes back to Martina Ramirez, and the train image comes back into it. So the way this is laid out in the page is that you have different columns, the breathing apparatus for being inside these underwater caves. They all become like fine lines, like very compressed tunnels in their own right. So this goes on for the pages of the poem. And that just feels like a really interesting way for me to explore the inner sensation of what it means to have these tunnels opening up, and to explore that on the shape of a page, which is so different from a performance experience. When you're reading it, you still hopefully get a sense of constriction on the page because of the narrowness of the writing, and then suddenly it all opens up and you have really wide writing and then narrow again. So I'm trying to create a somatic feeling for the reader as they're reading their way through the poem.
On a little bit larger scale, looking at the book as a whole, what do you hope readers will take away from this book most?
Yeah, what I love readers to take away is, oh, so many things. I think the core thing I would like people to take away is that there's healing available, that there is richness available, that in and at sites of violence, ancient violence, ancestral violence, disability violence, anti-women violence, so many different violences, personal experiences of violences, that there are ways in which we can heal, continue living, maybe not fully heal as in be whole again, but to move through and with the alivenesses of the world. So to move with the spider, to move with the little worms. The worms are really interesting, actually. It's got like a little side story. The worms that we have here in Michigan are not, they're not native to Michigan. They came with the colonizers, right? I mean, it's very interesting because in the Ice Age period, the soft-bodied creatures of Michigan, the soft-bodied worms got eradicated. This is what scientists tell us. So there are no native little pink worms. So these are the little pink wormed settlers of Michigan, like deep down there. I just find it quite fascinating, pink settlers. So getting involved with these kinds of stories, getting involved with these kind of creatures can give you a different sense of who is on the land, whom we're living with, whom we're cohabitating with, how we can be in ethical relationship to one another. Those are the kinds of stories I love people to take away. I love people to take away the story of Beth's tinctures for me. I love for people to take away the care that's extended by being in online communities and engaging in these performances together and holding the remnants of that in writing. The ways that we can hold on to joy through writing as we're moving through hard times like the COVID lockdown and the ongoing COVID pandemic.
So, notwithstanding that this book has just been released, are you working on any new writing now?
Yes, I am working on new writing. So I'm so grateful to have received a Guggenheim Fellowship this year. So which is just amazing. It's just one of these gifts of the goddess that I can barely still wrap my head around, right? So it's just a wonderful thing. And I got this for a project called the Crip Mad Archive Dances. So Crip is a in-community word for disabled. MAD is a word that many psychiatric survivors, mental health system users, mental health survivors are using for themselves. So Crip and MAD have both these feelings of in-group words. And I'm looking at ancestral traces, how to find disabled and mad dancers in the archives. And I'm using a lot of the techniques that I'm using in a diver to do that. So I'm always having that personal connection. I'm always going out and touching lavender. I touch, sage. Today I was spending time with the ginkgo bilboa tree to think about memory, holding the leaves. And it's winter, so the leaves of the tree were not on the tree. The tree is bare, but I found some desiccated leaves on the ground, and I was holding these brown earthy leaves of the ginkgo biloba tree, which are these fan-shaped, beautiful leaves. So I couldn't believe it. I just found that today. I was just thinking about plants and memory together. And of course, one of the plants that's so associated with memory is the ginkgo tree. And I walked into the city garden here and there was a ginkgo tree. Amazing. So I'm using that experience as a base strata around which I create and accumulate material about mad ancestors that I found and crip ancestors that I found in the dance archive. So all kinds of people, often people that people are not familiar with. Some names people would be familiar with, like Fred Benjamin, who is a jazz American Black dance and jazz pioneer. He's in this archive that I'm building. Vaslav Nijinsky, a ballet, European ballet dancer who spent the vast, like the later half of his lives in asylums and also passed away in one. So I'm calling him into this. So I'm creating these clouds of associations, but they're always grounded in land and in community performances. I just had the pleasure a few weeks ago to be an artist in residence with Axis Dance Company, which is a company out in California, in Berkeley, California. And they're one of the integrated dance companies in this country. So people who are extremely beautiful, able, young, energetic dancers, some of whom are using wheelchairs, some of whom are deaf, some of whom have other kinds of disabilities. They dance together and create these amazing spectacles. They are just what I would call a super crip. I'm a woman of size. I don't move easily in the world. I live with pain. So I'm not one of those kinds of disabled dancers who can do all kinds of amazing things with my wheelchair. But these young, wonderful dancers could. But they were so generous working with me in looking at, for instance, some of the Nijinsky's traces, and then bringing these traces into their own body and using their incredible disabled abilities to create a new dance out of that. So I was working with them, and I'm now both writing about the experience, and I also have filmic material that I'm editing together. So I hope that at the end of this Guggenheim Fellowship, I have an experimental documentary, which I will share with people. I've already begun sharing with people, where I can show people some of the richness of how we can engage pain and joy in disabled and mad dancing through the ages.
Oh, amen to that. We'd love to hear some of your work. You've described it beautifully. Would you like to read some of that for our listeners?
I would be honored. Thank you. And I'm going to start with a poem that gets us right back to your first question about what I started writing with, right? And I mentioned the fairy tale. So this is very much located in Germany, which is, yeah, you'll see. All right. So this is The Dancing Princesses. Dancing princesses. An unknown number of princesses vanish at night. They go down a trapdoor in their bedrooms, sisters all. The hole in the ground leads to a winding path. The path enters a silver forest, then a golden forest, then a forest of diamonds. The detective who follows them in an invisibility cloak breaks a bough. The trees scream. The unknown number of princesses arrive at a lake. An unknown number of princess and princesses await them with boats. They hitch a ride, and the invisible detective jumps in with the youngest princess. Her swain complains that the boat is heavier than normal. The princess says, "It's the heat. We are all getting tired." The company arrives at a castle. They dance the night away. At 3 a.m., the shoes of an unknown number of princesses are worn through, in tatters, with holes, decayed and fragile. They all, including the invisible detective, run home, up the staircase, through the trapdoor, across the creaky floorboards, and are found asleep the next morning. There were 2 brothers by the name of Grimm. They collected this tale, a story brought to them. Sometimes unnamed women garnered the stories, detectives at the hearth, informants, ethnographic practices in the German countryside, fantasy police procedural. To warn of the dire wolf, to not go out at night, to see your true, true love in a lying mirror, to dance in burning coals. Wesens live all around you right now. In the Grimm story, the detective is an old, tired soldier out to gain a wife and a kingdom if he finds the answer to the vanishing women and their danced-out shoes. There are few answers, and only a handful that would stand up in court. In this story, numbers are not endless, numbers huge and obscured. Detectives hurt others in their hunt. Trees scream with a train whistle. This poem could be printed on a piece of old t-shirt, worn and velvet from washing and from the rain. Maybe a mouse pilfers threads for its nest. A swallow shits on it, coming home into the barn's high beams after hunting and eating a thick, furry moth. Women vanish, are accused of going dancing. Kings and queens alert them to danger and seek to imprison them with heavy door locks and golden keys. The danger comes from the soldiers out there. Good citizens blend in to fool. The youngest princess, not 14 years old, climbs into her ride. A boat of a car, fins slice the air, traverse the moat. The princess, so dark, so fair. In the night, sleep in the golden bow, sleep in the abandoned lot. Diamond eyelids blink cat's eyes for the club. Lies to the mother. There lies the rub. The candyman brings the dope. The rope swings in the barn. The neighbors spin the yarn. Rumpelstiltskin should be recognizable. That's all they ask for, like a hunchback in an identikit. Clouds vanish in the clear cat lantern jaw, the maw of suburbia. I'm going to read Reintegration. It's just one of those decay poems. Reintegration. She has difficulty writing, even imagining that girl's body, her life, what she might have been feeling, writes Donna de la Perrière in Works of Love and Terror. That's the epigraph. Beetle transports human hair to its burrow. It's down, she's down. Hair nests deep beneath earth, long black hairs loosened, wound around adhesive footpads, pulvily. Welcome to a new home of soil-based grease. Lawn care feelings echo the earth's rotation. Sunshine warms the entry hole till it glows. Deep beetle sees the round ahead, a gloriole, a halo. Beetle saints strip tiny bits of hair, toe-headed child's clippings become plush fillings for larvae featherbeds. Grass verge feels the trap between the cambium's pure water. Tree feels effluvia flow in progress. Suck. Black paint dappled onto green leaf feelings, rosy glow. Road divider wild plant feelings. Grass kneels down. Tree umbrellas with the widest arms reach to neighbor. Shade and scorch releases fluids. Cadaverine particles soak into clay, bind with kaolin that bakes into whiteness. Grass feels pressure when a line of policemen tramp. Tree falls after the arson fire jumps over the barn into its arms. Grass feels the impact this time, heavy. It booms. This is no casual throw, no careful positioning. This hurts. Mud churns milk-like from earth and rain. Shoe ballet mashes wine grapes. Chlorophyll juices squelch into a broth. Sparrow jumps into shoe print. Worms sing round O's. Dark world pecks them into twos. Each survives, thrives, deeply tucked into narrow tunnels of clay-cool earth. Touch the worm's hind part. Galvanized taste buds signal the feast. Blowflies land in aromatic clouds. Taste of salt leach far. Ring crystals spread a root bale. Bloat and release. The bubble sinks to the sigh of leaves. Shift phosphorus bioavailability. Change graphs. Use asphalt to neutralize the last nitrogen. Fix it into soil. Find the ancient photograph. Tender skins baked deep before spring rain can wash it into the river. Feed algae bloom, a blossom to honor the dead.
Beautiful. Our guest today has been Petra Kuppers. The book is Diver Beneath the Street, released by Wayne State University Press. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for this beautiful interview.
Thanks for joining us. Look for more episodes of All Right in Sin City wherever you listen to podcasts, or check out our website, allrightinsincity.com. For information and announcements of new podcasts, sign up to our email list or follow us on Facebook and Twitter.